So obviously, all this is kind of building up to cashless. So before I kind of jump into the cashless conversation, I want to kind of recap a little bit what I'm talking about. I think a lot of people are getting really excited about cashless. I think the challenge from a practical perspective with cashless is that until you get a really solid foundation around access control, in other words, everyone's got to get a wristband. There has to be a process. We have to have good customer service. The patrons have to buy into it at least for a year. So the festivals I talk to really want to embrace the technology. They want to go straight to cashless. I think my experience, and I think what we've been looking at with what's happened, and there's some history if you look back at some of the festivals that play around with technology. Both there's been a couple in the U.S. And some in Europe. These experiences haven't been great, mainly because they pushed the access control plan and cashless into the same project. And I think you have to get wristband registration down, and you have to get access control down, and you have to get this whole process really smooth out as a festival. But you really got it. The most important part is your infrastructure, because there's so much preparation to get RFID technology. It's not that it can't be done well and it can't be done at an effective price, but there definitely is a lot of considerations that go into this. You have to get, I think, a year or two of your festival purely into that solid access control system, as well as kind of integrating with registration, social media. Get all those things really bought in by your patrons, your staff, and your entire team. Once that's really good and solid, then I think you can start really looking at cashless. And then I think cashless should be, a project can be done effectively and correctly. But again, it presents a whole nother level of challenges, because you're going to have to start dealing with all kinds of different things. Like, how do you deal with, what do you do as a festival on Monday when your festival ends? Well, if everyone's got money left over in their wristbands, what do we do with the money? Do we refund it? Do they get to use it towards merchandise? So all these decisions need to be kind of factored in and thought about. There's a lot of planning that has to go into cashless. And obviously going to cashless means, are we going to take away a lot of the ATM machines? Do we, how are we going to deal, how many new stations do we have to put in so people can, do we use kiosks to let people up the balance on their wristbands, or do we do that through some kind of festival controlled areas around the vending clusters? So just all depends on that. But I think cashless in itself is such a large project, it needs to be treated as a separate one. It needs to be done maybe year 2, year 3 after you've done RFID for at least a year. Sorry, I see someone's got a question here. I'm going to kind of run through this last area because I know we're getting a little tight on time. Obviously, again, I just talked about that. Establish RFID technology with patrons before introducing cashless. I think the patrons have to buy in. There's a ton of benefit for them without cashless. But obviously, the minute you get the cashless, the festival can start making money. Obviously, with most festivals in the first year, RFID tends to be an expense, not necessarily boosting revenues. So that can be a burden for a lot of people. And that's one of the reasons why at Vendini, we're trying to build this as one ecosystem so that we can actually take that burden away by bundling everything into basically, say, the ticket fees that are being charged on the tickets up front, and on the backside, you're not paying anything for the technology. So there's different models that we can look at, and we're still developing those, but that's kind of where the goal is with that. Festival needs to gain experience with RFID in working with RFID, but we're trying to use for commerce-related transactions. So again, this kind of points out what I was saying earlier about you must really get this down solid before you try to start moving money into the equation. Integration of cashless should be rolled out in 1 or 2 phases. And what I mean by this, and I'll in the next few slides kind of illustrate this. If you're a festival that owns your own concessions, and then you also are contracting food vendors and craft vendors to come in, you may want to consider just rolling concessions or potentially VIP services only into cashless first year. Don't bite off the entire project and do everyone. Depends on your resources and what you're willing to risk in this scenario. But the bottom line is, if kind of think about it, and it's nothing wrong with saying let's just do VIP only, or let's just do, say, beer and wine sales only, because we own that product and that's not being done through some contractor. So that's what I mean by this process. So phase 1 might be, let's just do our concessions only, and let's get rid of tokens, let's get rid of paper tickets, and just go to RFID for beer. There's some advantages that, like, be able to, like, maybe do ID verification on the wristband, so you can put a second one on there. So when they tap the point of sale device, which will be an iPod Touch in our case, it would say this person's ID has not been verified. Once they've been verified, they get programmed on the wristband. So there's some cool little things about that can work, and they can also put in some technology to ensure that gets done correctly. VIP services, things like VIP shuttles. Let's say you've got a taxi program right now that's being treated in cash, so that's kind of there's some issues with that. So it'd be nice to be able to say, well, okay, you can buy beer and wine on your wristband, and you can buy access to showers. You can buy access to, say, the taxi program. It all depends on what your VIP programs look like, but the ability to put that, move that technology or move that transaction into the wristband, that might be another phase one thing that could be done very easily, or you could look at that as a phase two process. Food vendors. Food vendors are a little more complicated, but I think in the end, because you have to get them to buy in too, and that can be a little more difficult than making your own staff do it. But food vendors, I feel like, is a phase two project because it and there's not as much profit there. The ROI on that's not as great. You're just focusing on more efficient processing, get rid of cash, maybe removing some graft if that's going on. It depends on how your relationships are with those people. But I think this is something that's good, but I think it should be built on top of your concession process. Um, Things like craft vendors, just kind of touch on that last point. I don't know if it ever makes sense to move craft vendors into cashless. If they're making products or they're not food related or alcohol or drink related, it may never make sense to push them in. I think we got to wait and see how things develop. But my recommendation on this would be, let's wait and let this cashless technology mature before you're starting to deal with a much more complicated product mix. Because obviously their price ranges for craft vendors range all over the place. Where food vendors, they're selling 3 to 4 items at a certain price point. It's pretty easy to set up a point of sale system for that. I think developing complex point of sale systems for festivals may be, in the short term, is a little impractical in my mind. So benefits of RFID payment technologies, obviously upselling on the GA and the VIP services, upgrades as well. Eliminating cash, which has some liabilities to it, as well as safety issues. Tokens and tickets, that's more for making sure that things get processed in a more speedy fashion, and then obviously more secure patron spending. What that basically means is, if I put money on my wristband, I can leave my wallet in my car. I've already been ID verified, so I can hang out for the rest of the weekend with my wristband. I'm not going to lose my cash. I'm not going to drop stuff. I don't. It's patrons have a little bit better experience. If they lose their wristband, they go get their ID and come up to customer service. We give them a new wristband. We transfer their balance from that wristband to the next one because that's managed in the central database, not on the wristband itself. That allows, if someone breaks their wristband or loses it or whatever, they don't lose their money. And we can talk about different technologies about how they how when they interact with that point of sale, how do they verify that it's them? So if someone steals their wristband, they still can't use the money. So there's different ways to kind of talk through that as well. Sell more products efficiently. Here's a big one that I'm discovering with when talking to the vending side is real-time sales reporting. I think this is also really important on concessions, but to be able to sit in the admin trailer and look at what's going on from a vendor cluster perspective or from a different type of category of sales, be able to see the actual sales in real time and not like figuring that out at the end of the night at 3 o'clock in the morning whenever you're doing that. Obviously, it's less risk and lower liabilities. Obviously, if you're not moving, hundreds of thousands of dollars of cash around site, you don't have to worry as much about what's going on there. Obviously, eliminate theft and/or exchange mistakes. And then obviously the analytics, be able to analyze what's selling, what's not selling. Maybe it helps you kind of curate next year which food vendors you're bringing back. Be able to make that a much easier process is obviously beneficial. So in summary, I've kind of talked about a lot of topics today, but what we're really trying to do is kind of paint this picture of, with RFID, it's about an ecosystem. So you have to get, I think what we want to see happen is this ability to get kind of the front of the house processes, back of the house processes, bring everything into a central system, and really try to make that process fairly straightforward. Because I think the challenge with Cashless right now, what it's running into, it's not just about, there's problems with the handsets and there's some problems with the point of sale. Obviously, it's very expensive to roll out, requires a lot more people on site to deploy it. So if you can get this kind of commoditize that front of the house piece where ticketing is easy, back of the house works, it's all integrated, it's really smooth, then we have a great foundation that's solid that can service all areas of a festival, both from the front of the house, back of the house perspective. And then at that point, we're freeing up our clients and your teams to be able to focus on, okay, how can we build better programs? How do we continue to grow our sales? How do we grow our pre-sales? Different things like that. How do we sell upgraded services on these things? How do we move to cashless so we can make more profitability? With some festivals, sometimes it's not about selling more tickets. It's more about upselling the experience and selling more valuable services. So really, I think what we're trying to do here in this particular presentation is talk about, all these things I talked about should fairly become easy at this point, and rolling into the next 2 or 3 years, how do we focus on moving ourselves in those directions as partners in the festival industry? And then if you guys are interested in talking more one-on-one, obviously I did a lot of overview in this process, but if you guys have specific questions, and some of the things I talked about may have not been relevant to everyone in the audience in certain areas of the presentation, if you want to spend more time talking about more granular areas of the festival where I can bring some insights into the experiences I've run into, both from a success and failure perspective, with the festivals in terms of RFID, access control, and all these different areas. You can email festivals@vendini.com. That email goes to me and 3 or 4 other people that are part of our team on the festival side. I'd be happy to set up a meeting, and we can talk through those areas and see if there's anything that we can help you with on that.